Hi, everyone, and thanks for checking out this movie review. So, today we're going to be continuing with the current horror franchise, and that's Friday the 13th, that I'm taking a look at this month. And today we're going to take a look at Friday the 13th, Part 3, or also known as Friday the 13th 3D. So, like I said, I don't have the actual movie, but it's part of this 8 pack that I have. Friday the 13th, Part 3, right there. Um, So yeah, all of my reviews will be with this box set here for the first 8 anyway. Um, so yeah, I'll just kind of get into Friday the 13th Part 3 or 3D. First of all, I didn't watch it in 3D. I don't have the glasses. I do have the option with the Blu-ray DVD to watch it in 2D or 3D, but what's the point of watching it in 3D if you don't have the glasses? And so I watched it in 2D. Just thought I'd get that out there. But I'll just kind of go through the setup and the premise of the movie like I normally do, and then I'll get into my thoughts and review, which will contain spoilers. So, Friday the 13th Part 3 is a 1982 American slasher film, once again directed by Steve Miner, who directed the second one, produced by Frank Mancuso Jr., and the movie stars Dana Kimmel as Chris Higgins, Paul Kratka as Rick, Tracy Savage as Debbie, Jeffrey Rogers as Andy, Catherine Parks as Vera Sanchez, Larry Zerner as Shelley, and Richard Brooker as Jason Voorhees. So, set directly after the events of Friday the 13th Part 2, the plot follows a teenage girl, played by Dana Kimmel, named Chris, and her friends who go on a trip to her old house near Crystal Lake, where a wounded Jason Voorhees has taken refuge until re-emerging for another killing spree. The film marks the first appearance of Jason's signature hockey mask, which has since become a trademark of both the character and the franchise, as well as an icon in American cinema and the horror genre in general. So the movie starts out following the events of the night before, which is the end of part two. A badly injured and unmasked Jason Voorhees goes to a lakefront store for a change of clothes. While there, he murders the store owner Harold and his wife Edna. Meanwhile, Chris Higgins and her friends travel to Higgins Haven, which is her old house on Crystal Lake, to spend the weekend. The gang includes pregnant Debbie, her boyfriend Andy, prankster Shelley, his blind date Vera, who does not reciprocate his feelings, and stoners Chuck and Chili. After running into a man named Abel who warns them to turn back, the gang meets Chris's boyfriend Rick at their destination. At a convenience store, Shelley and Vera get into a confrontation with bikers, Allie, Fox, and Loco. Shelley gets in the car and knocks down the motorcycles, impressing Vera. But later, the bikers show up at Higgins Haven, where they take the gas out of the van and attempt to burn the barn down to get even. Unfortunately for them, Jason, who's hiding in the barn, murders Fox and Loco with a pitchfork before beating Allie unconscious. That night, Chris and Rick head out into the woods, where Chris reveals that she was attacked by a deformed man 2 years prior, which prompted her to leave Crystal Lake in the first place. The main reason that she returned was to confront her fears and escape her trauma. So that's about as much as I'll get into with the story. Obviously, you can guess probably what happens from there. As Jason's hiding in the barn of this Higgins Haven, as it's called, this old house that Chris Higgins lived in this area, that she was attacked by this deformed man, which I'm pretty sure is obvious as Jason. So yeah, that's the movie. The beginning of it anyway. Friday the 13th, Part 3, or Friday the 13th 3D from 1982. Um, so I'll just kind of get into my review of it, my thoughts. This is a very mixed movie for me, a little bit more than the first two, to be honest with you. It definitely has some good. There's really two big positives that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, but it's also got quite a few cons that I'll have to get into. So let's start with the pros. And number one, the biggest pro of this movie is Richard Brooker, who plays Jason Voorhees in this movie. He's great. Definitely one of the best portrayals of Jason in this entire franchise. Just the look of him, how big and bulky he is, his reactions. I really love his performance as Jason. Such an improvement over potato sack hillbilly Jason that we got in part two. So that was definitely an improvement on the previous movie. Definitely the highlight of this movie, Richard Brooker. as Jason Voorhees. Who, I mean, this is really, you could say it's the first movie that's they knew that Jason. This is sort of his movie, and they sort of made the movie on that. And the other big pro in this movie are the kills. Definitely the best kills so far of the franchise. The first three movies. Part of that's because of the 3D gimmick and the kills from that standpoint. My favorite kill out of all of them is the guy that's doing the handstanding or the hand walking, I guess you would call it, who basically gets chopped by Jason's machete right down the middle. So that was pretty awesome. Also, the eyeball popping out kill, and then of course the harpoon arrow through the eye. Those are all the kills are great in this movie. So that's definitely the other big pro in this movie. Obviously, Jason gets his iconic hockey mask in this movie, which he'll continue with the rest of the franchise. So you got to talk about that as being a pro. It just makes him the villain that we know, that everybody knows, even people that aren't fans of this series. When you think of a hockey mask, besides hockey, and some people probably think of Jason in this franchise before they'd even think of the sport of hockey. So that's definitely a pro. I think the final girl, Chris, who's played by Dana Kimmel's pretty solid. I would rank her ahead of Alice, but still below Ginny from Part Two. Um, Not as good as Ginny from Part Two, but I think she's a pretty good final girl. She's not just running and screaming. She goes after Jason. She gets her shots in with them and stuff. And I don't know. I thought she was pretty effective. Um, the third act of this movie is really good. It's filled with chases, kills, and fun that makes the movie pretty effective. Um, well, the story's simple, not very creative, because obviously you're going to have teenagers at somewhere around Camp Crystal Lake. It was different than the first two movies. They didn't just do a rehash of camp counselors. This was different in the sense that you have this character, Chris Higgins, who's kind of a backstory of being attacked by Jason a couple years prior and returning to this house for the first time, which is near Crystal Lake. Not, but it's not Camp Crystal Lake, and her friends joining her. So, I mean, I guess on one hand you could say that's predictable and kind of a repeat formula, but I mean, at least it's somewhat different of a story, even though not very creative or terribly different. I appreciated that, as you've probably seen with my other reviews. I appreciate when they at least try to do something different with the story. It doesn't make it great, but it's different. Um, I think the writers and the director kind of knew what they had with this movie, with Jason sort of being the star now. The movie's pretty silly and more so than the first two, but it's almost so bad it's good kind of a thing, especially from the 3D gimmick standpoint. They knew what they had, and I think they delivered pretty well for what they had. Like I said, overall, it's a sillier but fun movie with great kills and a good final act. So those are basically my pros for the movie. As far as cons go, I have to start with the characters. Big step back from part two, in my opinion. I even think it might be a little bit of a step back from part one, and I think the characters were great in that movie. But these are the ultimate stock characters. You even got a couple of stoners in this movie. Just so cliched, so stocked. I mean, the bulk of these characters, other than the final girl, are just there to be killed by Jason, and you can feel it. They're just not well written, not well acted. The acting is definitely a step back in this movie as well. Um, that's one of my big cons. The other big con is this movie takes a long time to get going. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we don't have likable characters or well written, interesting characters. The first half of the movie is kind of a drudge to get through, or at least it was for me, to try to set up this story and these characters and everything. I just wasn't all that interested in it. It was, it takes a long time to get going. So that's definitely a con. The 3D effects, while they're interesting, especially in 1982, I'm sure. And obviously, I didn't watch the 3D version, but given what they were trying to do when they're putting things towards the screen in very weird and unconvincing ways, it really doesn't hold up. I mean, from what I've heard, people that have watched it in 3D, it doesn't hold up because this was at the very beginning of 3D, so that takes a little bit away from the movie. Those practical 3D effects. Um, The movie takes place during the day, unlike the first two movies, or at least the final act of the first two movies. It's this movie's not as dark as those two were. It's a lot more daylight, more in the daytime where Jason attacks. I'm not crazy about that. I think it takes away a little bit from the suspenseful atmosphere that the first two movies had, but um, yeah, just not a big fan of that. I know you know, in one sentence, I'm saying I want something different, but story wise, I like when they try something different. But I think the atmosphere wise, it worked what they did in the first two movies. So I'm not a big fan of them having most of it take place in the during the daylight. The barn part doesn't really bother me. I know some people have mentioned the barn is so important in the third movie. Barns can be creepy, but I think it would be even creepier at night in the dark. So, not getting to see Shelley's kill on screen, that was a letdown, especially since that character's kind of annoying. You kind of wanted to see him get killed because he basically faked his own death so many times earlier in this movie. Now, I didn't find him overly annoying like some people did. Maybe it's because I can relate to that character a little bit more. He actually, of all the characters, you could argue that he actually had a little bit of, not development, but there was something there with his whole not really kind of thinking he's overweight and not really that attractive and stuff like that. I think it's more of a relatable character in some ways. He wasn't quite as stock, although he was very annoying. Once again, for the third movie in a row, we get the whole dream sequence at the end, which I could have done without. They really got to stop doing this. This time, it's she pushes a canoe out in the lake, and they try to rip off the first movie dream sequence. Although it's where she sees Jason running out of the house without his hockey mask, and then he disappears. And then it's sort of a reverse of the first movie. Instead of Jason jumping out of the lake and pulling her down from the canoe, it happens to be Pamela Voorhees, who's all worm infested and weird looking, but still got the sweater on. And then, of course, it appears to all be a dream. As the next day, the cops take her out of the house, where she looks like she's pretty hysterical as well as kind of gone crazy. Why do they do this? I mean, was it a thing back in the early 80s? I don't know. I was only 2, 3 years old during the time these movies were making, but it's one thing to do it in the first movie, but to continue to do it not only in the second movie, but then the third movie. And I can only hope they don't do this again in the fourth movie. Just not great. I don't like it. And that brings me to my last con, which is the beginning of this movie once again, where they spend 6 or 7 minutes rehashing the end of part two to try to get, I guess, to kind of recap and get people caught up. If you haven't seen the first two movies, why the hell are you watching part three? Yeah, I'm not a fan of the recaps. They did it in part two as well. It's even worse in this movie. It's not effective. It's not needed. It's just kind of silly. So those are my thoughts and review on part three of the Friday the 13th part three from 1982. Directed once again by Steve Miner, who I think he does a pretty good job. As I said with the pros, he knows what he's got here, and for what they were going for, he delivers. The movie's sillier. The 3D effects don't really hold up as well. The characters have taken a big step back, but Jason, the character, has taken a big step up. It's a very mixed bag. I Well, I don't think it's terrible by any means, and I can certainly watch it. It's enjoyable. Well, other than the first half, because of that first half, the fact that it's such a drudge to get through, I'm going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. So a little bit of a half star down from the first two movies, but it's still fun. I mean, if you can go into it with just a fun popcorn movie, the kills are really good. Jason's really good and effective. 7.5 out of 10 for my rating on Friday the 13th Part Three from 1982. Um, Go ahead and comment down below. Give me your thoughts on this movie, guys. Is it a mixed bag for you? Do you like it more than I did? Do you like it less than I did? Give me your reasons why. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel to see future Friday the 13th reviews, as well as my ranking at the end of the month and other standalone movie reviews as well. So thank you for watching this movie. Have a great day. Bye.